anyone is watching this live, I will be very pleased and excited. But I am here streaming live with Siciliana Trevino. Siciliana is an award winning AR VR producer and filmmaker who uses new technology to create immersive worlds where players can escape the everyday and experience shared moments of delight, which is a thing that we are here to talk to her about. As a product manager for Alcove VR, the free social VR app for multi generational families created by the AARP, she oversaw the release of hundreds of 360 or 3D virtual tours filmed around the world and directed pilot programs for underserved communities to explore how virtual travel games and podcasts in VR can reduce stress, educate, and increase relaxation. That's also something that you expanded from the original bio, Siciliana, and I want to dig into that as well. Um, she's the host of the Zero to Start podcast with a spotlight series sponsored by Meta about VR development for beginners. Siciliana wrote, produced, and developed H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds Invasion. This is the first AR audio interactive podcast and an action adventure game made exclusively for Bose AR frames. She wrote and produced Icebreakers, a cross platform and multiplayer social networking game that breaks down communication barriers. It was first prototyped in augmented reality using Google's AR Core at the Reality Virtually Hackathon at MIT. And her documentary, New Mo Cut, David Peoples' lost film of Mo's books, won Best Editing in the Filmstock Film Festival and is archived at UC Berkeley's Bancroft Library. I watched that one. It was really beautiful. In 2015, Siciliana started Off Planet VR, Berkeley, California's first VR meetup to connect the city's creatives exploring immersive tech. And in 2017, she launched AR VR Women's Futurist in Residence program to increase multicultural leadership in immersive media. The program was funded by the Center for Cultural Innovation with support from the Kenneth Rainin Foundation and put state-of-the-art augmented reality headsets in the hands of Black women artists to gauge their impact on art, design, and the future. Siciliana received her BFA in film and video from CalArts. So Siciliana, thank you so much for being here with us.
It's really a pleasure. And I just was so excited about your podcast focusing on the future of podcasting and such a great title.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. So, so just to sort of give everyone who's listening at home a background in what we're building here with How Does Tomorrow Sound, we are trying to do a deep inquiry into the future of podcasting, imagining that podcasting is a tech dependent medium and a medium that will transition or evolve as technology transitions and evolves. So we're trying to imagine what the future of podcasting will be. And that's one reason why I'm really excited that you're here, because you work in some new media spaces that really feel new. So let's jump into that. What drew you to AR and VR? What did you like? What made you want to make films in these spaces?
It would have to be the first time I tried VR. Well, I should confess that actually the first time that I tried VR was at a rave called Toontown in San Francisco in the mid 90s. So it was very much feeling like you were in the music video, Dire Straits, Money for Nothing, and clunky, pixelated, laggy, expensive. So I was really more into Super 8 at that time, Super 8 film. I
Mm-hmm.
was in my Super 8 phase. And video, I think, still was associated with just sort of um, entry level, right? I mean, there was a lot of
Mm-hmm.
fantastic video art that was happening, but there were a lot more film snobs, right? You had to shoot
Right.
in authentic film versus video, and the equipment was really hard to get a hold of. So you had to go to film school. And fast forward to post Cal Arts 19, I'm all 19. Like it was
Mm-hmm.
actually in 2015. I had just moved back to the Bay Area from New York City, and um, my husband bought home an Oculus developer kit. It's called the DK2. And I was pretty resistant at first, thinking that it was just not going to work. It's going to make people sick. And eventually, I thought, well, I can't really dismiss it without trying it.
Mm-hmm.
So he put me into a North Face demo. Where I was overlooking a cliff and I just about lost my footing and felt like I needed to put my arms out so that I could fly.
Mm-hmm.
And that was when I was hooked. I thought they did it. They put us in the game, and life is really never going to be the same. So I called my friend Gabby Lala and was like, "We have to make a VR music video." She's like, "What's that?" I was like, "I don't know. We're gonna find out." And it just so happened that she had just completed an album with her band Snow Angels. So we launched a Kickstarter and raised $10,000 in 2015, 2016 to create a music video for her We Love track. And the prize that you got for the reward on the Kickstarter was a Google Cardboard, where
Mm-hmm.
the app was for an Android phone device. And you could play it on the Google Cardboard or the old school Gear VR headset.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we launched that. And after that, the tools accelerated so quickly. And I think that was like whiplash.
Yeah. So I did watch that music video, but I think I watched I mean, I definitely watched the 2D version that's on your website.
Uh-huh.
There's a 3D version in VR. How are those different? I mean, how do they feel different?
Well, what's interesting, so when I started making We Love, the music video, you couldn't watch 360 video on YouTube. So in the
Mm-hmm.
process of making it, I basically had to become a mobile app developer. In addition to, using Premiere had just come out with 360 video support. It was a really exciting time, but the tools were still just brand new. And so by the time I actually got it functioning and working, YouTube had 360 video support. So if you have a Quest headset, you can go um, into YouTube VR and see We Love in 360.
Oh, that's
It's
so
very
cool.
psychedelic and colorful and fun, um, and short. It's
Yeah,
short.
that's so cool. I'll have to check
Costs
it out.
less.
Yeah.
It costs less.
So let's talk
It's
about.
really expensive to produce VR. So
I imagine so. I do want to get into that in terms of like we're talking about so many different mediums, right? I'm talking about podcast production, which is relatively cheap and just audio
mhm.
based. And then you started from film, coming into this 3D space. And then I think where we might sort of overlap is at your audio podcast, H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds Invasion. Um, because that is an audio first project in augmented reality. Can you tell us how this idea got born?
Sure. So I've long been a fan of War of the Worlds, particularly by Orson Welles, and the first adaptation that I wanted to produce was for Facebook Spaces, which was Facebook before it was Meta. It was their first social VR experience that was fully integrated with Facebook. So you could live stream from your virtual home and also um, to your Facebook page, but then you could bring in media from within this world so that there were 360 globes that you could collect in your apartment and set them as backdrops. So when you asked earlier what's the difference between like watching a 2D video and a 360 video, is that sense of immersion that you get. And while you could go on a whole separate episode of whether or not 360 is VR, um, you still, because there's not the interactivity with 360 video, you can still press buttons, but you don't get like a real time kind of experience that you can um, with computer generated game engine driven graphics in VR. So um, it just was something that with Facebook Spaces, you could put these globes onto your avatar and it would launch this experience. And so there was this sense of there were a couple things that happened that coincided with a big anniversary for War of the Worlds, which came out on Halloween on October, I think 30th it was. And in that time, breaking news was brand new, and that was the novelty that he used, that Orson Welles used um, to kind of just make his story basically go viral. It was the first fake news, really, coming out of radio. So I thought it would be fun to do a live breaking news story of an alien invasion in spaces. But then in 2019, they announced that they were discontinuing spaces. And so that idea just sort of, I started to do other things. The pandemic hit, and actually in 2019, um, getting back to Bose, I saw there was a game jam. Bose was announcing the launch of their new frames, which had an audio AR component um, with gyroscopes, so you could do interactive inputs and gestural input control. So they had game jams around the country, about 5 locations. So I was one of 5 teams that was selected to represent San Francisco. And when I was looking at the brand guide, it talked about all the like 5 main features, and then it just said radio. And I thought, okay, we're gonna do War of the Worlds in and build this world in radio. And the Martians are now here for our memes. So all of the components of the game would rely on audio memes from the golden age of YouTube. So like Rick Rolls,
Yeah.
the stunned gopher. I think we used. So there was all once we had the idea of War of the Worlds, it opened up so many possibilities in the sound, right? Because we know exactly what we're going for. Like the technology is the hard part, but
Hmm.
the sound part became a dream project because you got to dive into sci-fi space, alien invasion combined with memes. So I'm researching memes, which which was the fun part, obviously. But
Yeah.
then, um, so that's how.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I'm curious. First of all, you have listened to the episode that we just put out, which was about audio memes and how they might find a place in something like a podcast. But it sounds like you are borrowing in 2 ways. One is the the radio the radio anaphones, or like the original Orson Welles War of the World breaking news frame that is so iconic, and that people sort of recognize as like this is a breaking news moment. This is radio. This is how radio generally interrupts, to get to deliver
Right.
something. So you're kind of like able to use that form, or able to borrow that form and repurpose it for a new experience. Um, and then also you're embedding memes that people know, which is a way of sort of like building collective, um, collect building on a collective understanding, or a group like understanding of a space or a culture.
Yeah, I think for the listeners, definitely go and check out the last episode. What's up, chicken butt? I think it's called. It's because I think the conversation on the semiotics of how auditory memes work on us. Like I think there was someone who had said, a hook that has worked before is a hook that's going to work again, and especially the whole notion of interpolation and remixing, which is very big in the future of media and augmented reality. Um, but what was great about War of the Worlds is everyone knows what it is. Nobody knows what these sunglasses are and what they and all the different cool things that they can do. You can take phone calls on them, you can listen to podcasts and radio shows and cooking shows, but the beauty of it is that you're not looking at your phone. It's heads up, hands free. So, combined with, at some point voice, it just becomes very accessible and safe if you're out and about, especially if you're active and you're playing games and you don't want to step into oncoming traffic. So It worked on a lot of levels, but it really did the explaining of the technology in a way that that stories always do, right? So you're talking about the future of podcasting. It's really what I like to say is the future is the story of you now, right? So it's always going to be about story, no matter what the device is, and the better that we can, enhance a player's experience through the technology so that it's not incumbent on what it's called, which is a huge problem that you find with things like the metaverse and trying to define, delineate, oh, is it VR? Is it Web3? Is it all these different things? It's all story in the end. It's all a way to engage people for different purposes, whether it be to entertain them or to sell them products.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. I do want to get into the audio first considerations because you said this is
Mm-hmm.
heads up, hands free. I know that AR people envision AR as a video space with like a
Mm-hmm.
visual overlay in a pair of glasses. But can you talk about designing um, War of the Worlds Invasion as an audio first experience and what you sort of had, what considerations you had to make if it was
Sure.
hard for your filmmaker brain to think about audio
Actually,
in that
I'm so
way?
glad you said that. Actually, it was right at home for me as a filmmaker because it took me back to my days at Cal Arts, in fact, because video was so cheap and accessible that that's how you were expected to make your projects. And I was at film school at a time when Firewire came out. So everything, all the components, video, audio, channels were on one wire straight into the computer from the camera. It changed everything. And I remember like thinking that this is I don't know a lot about technology, but this is something big. And I want to understand it a little bit more. But before I do that, I want to cut my final project on film. I don't want to shoot a video. And my mentor, Tom Anderson, um, who is an incredible filmmaker, and I think it's LA films itself. Los Angeles plays itself is a documentary everyone should check out by Tom Anderson. And he said, this is how you're going to do it. He said, you have to, if you're going to shoot in film, you have to, a documentary, you have to film, you have to cut a radio edit. So do all of your interviews on mag tape and then cut cut the picture from the sound and then go back and film all b-roll basically. And so that's always the way I approach most of my projects is audio first is I cut and even Numo cut my last documentary is cut that way. I film all my interviews and then I cut the sound first and that's going to inform all of the images that's going to go along with it, but it saves so much money, right? It saves so much time, but you're just
Can you
not getting.
explain that to me? Like, why is that? Why does that save money, or what is the
Oh,
rationale behind that?
okay, so in film at the time, 16 millimeter was like $1 a minute or something. So if you wanted to shoot, well, no, $100 a minute, $1. No, it was like $100. So think about it now. Like we throw video away, even videotapes, high end beta SP,
We're
high
recording
eight.
this.
Yeah, right. Right. And we can do this from anywhere, right? And we could record it from our phones. So video is so accessible now that it's easy to throw away things. There's not a lot of value to each image. Where in film, because it costs so much, you have to really know what you're gonna process. And shooting live interviews, I had my documentary final film project is called Immigrant of the Year, and it's about my mom and my grandmother coming to Berkeley, California in the 50s through and an interracial marriage. So a lot of cross cultural like trauma, family trauma, so, and stories of hope and redemption. But um, I spent 3.5 hours talking to my grandmother, 4 hours talking to my mom, which left me wondering like why, after wanting to sort of as a young adult be my own person, suddenly I spent like, oh my gosh, why did I actually elect to listen to all of this hours and hours of my mom and my grandmother? Like, but the point being that um, I couldn't afford to film 3 hours of them talking and going through and cutting. So the audio really allowed me to spend a lot of deep and personal time with the story, get it to where I needed it to be, and then the being a beginner at that time too was very challenging just to get the imagery to go along at that point because it became very experimental because I didn't have you didn't have talking heads, you didn't have something to cut to, so everything had to rely on
I
their
see.
voices. So getting back to how do you build a story in audio first considerations, I think it's the best. Sometimes it can be the best way to start a story is looking at the audio and the emotion and the theme of the work, and then finding your thread to the characters that way. But for a game, the player is often the character. So, what world are they inhabiting? It opens the door to a lot of exploration and creativity, and I absolutely love it.
That's such an interesting way too to think about a story is that the main character is a vessel whose characteristics will be just like the players, what the player brings.
Well, and it's all emotion because music tells us, like in going back to that last episode that you did as well, right? It's like you hear a sound and it tells you sort of what the emotion and pace is, and then you can, as a director, play with that, right? War of the Worlds was compelling to me because it was dark. And most of my work up until that point, I mean, is very colorful and bright and happy, rainbows. So I really love the idea of being able to go dark, but then use sound and comedy to redirect and have it become light. So, because in the world we create, and maybe you can hear the sound, you can play it. We have, um, the speeder sounds, in War of the Worlds, you start actually with a podcast. It's a podcast, a Bay Area podcast. Radio DJ is talking about what she's playing, local
Mm-hmm.
music. The music starts, and then halfway through the song, you get an alert. Oh, you've, earned rewards. Double tap, you're listening to your glasses. You're listening to your glasses, right? And you like double tap, do you accept? And you either shake your head yes or double tap the side of your device. And you have to code all that stuff too, right?
Whoa.
So,
And that's just
uh,
how people engage the War of the World
right.
story.
And so when they accept the rewards, they've been thrown into an invisible battle. And so these tripods are invisible, but you hear the sound of the war. So there's like this other dimension happening in the real world, right? You're just, it's multidimensional. And it's a sad, dark place. It sounds like, yeah, the war.
Let's play the speeder sounds. Josh, if you don't mind. If you need help figuring out which ones those are.
Speeder engaged.
So all of a sudden you're thrown at you. There's instructions on how to play, but then, so, and then there was another overlay of the lasers that the tripods would shoot and come at you, and then your virtual assistant would say, "Jump left, jump
Oh
right,
my god.
jump left, jump right," so that you could avoid the lasers because the game mechanics that we wanted to use didn't actually work with the platform at the time.
Mm.
So there was this feature called the inertial measurement unit, IMU,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a gyroscope and some other sort of measuring devices that determined your orientation. So the idea was like, oh, so I could just move left and right and these tripods will know where I am, but based on where my glasses are. But really, the IMU chip was just a way for it to know whether the glasses were right side up or put
Oh.
down to turn off.
Oh.
So
Yeah.
it was really sensitive, and we couldn't use it to jump around. So Chris Matola, who was the lead developer, um, he came up with the device of a speeders. Like, so what, we know that you have to get to point A to point B,
Mm-hmm.
but the tripods will always know where the speeders are. So there could be a fleet of speeders moving towards the tripod to disable it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then the speeders act as the anchor and the orientation in space, but not your glasses in your actual physical position. So it was a
Yeah,
cheat.
that's fascinating. Yeah, that's fascinating. What were some of the challenges that you had to overcome when you were designing the sound?
So DJ Euphoric, Katie Gutierrez was a sound designer for War of the Worlds and did an amazing job of capturing the essence of 19 late 30s kind of sci-fi, science fiction, outer space sounds. That was the dream part, right? Like or the challenges around that are narrowing down and editing, right? Like you can get overwhelmed with having a lot of great sounds and not being able to decide what to use. So you have to do user testing, or if you have a real accelerated production cycle like we did, you just kind of just lose things that either are too the files are too big, or but the biggest challenge is really the platform itself, the integration, the software development kit, the APIs, the connecting. So these games that we were making are made with Unity game engine. So um, integrating the Bose SDK into Unity and getting everything talking to each other properly, launching when it should, and then we made a game for Android, and then we had to make one for iOS. So I guess to answer your question, the biggest challenge is the fact that these platforms are so new and experimental that they discontinue them when you're in the middle of making your game. So, which is what
Oh.
happened to Bose, which is what happened to Bose. So, as part of the game jam, our requirement was to make the game for both Android and iOS. And in the process of tests, we had published to the Google Play Store, and we were getting some really nice traction there for something so
Mm-hmm.
experimental and only available on the glasses, which
Mm-hmm.
for $2.99, it was a great price, for
Mm-hmm.
the sound and
Yeah.
the quality and all the features. So it was a really good, accessible, um, wearable for and having augmented experiences. But then it was so niche and so experimental that
Mm-hmm.
in 2020 they discontinued it, and so
So they
everyone who made,
discontinued the glasses?
I think they still have the glasses, but they discontinued all of their augmented software developer support.
Oh.
So the tech after a while just stops working because there's no support for it, and technically you're supposed to remove it from your game. So
Ah.
you could conceivably still have a War of the Worlds game without the audio AR components. It would have to be kind of rebuilt to a large part, which is
Yeah.
always something in the back of my mind. But
Right. Right.
it was
Right.
so sort of disappointing. But then also at the same time, there was the pandemic, and this particular game was really about being outside. I guess
Oh,
you could play
yeah.
inside, but
Yeah. Josh, can we listen to the perk up sound?
Perk up. Earn a free latte for each tripod you destroy. It's a latte or death situation.
I feel like it's a latte or death situation could easily be memeified.
here's hoping. I mean, the thing was that okay, so here's a little side thing, and no disrespect to the play crafting or anything. So the game jam in San Francisco, when you have these kinds of hackathons and things, like they should be plying you with lots of food and all this kind of stuff. And for this particular one, the teams were getting paid, so it wasn't like we made these games for free or anything like that. But the game jam weekend, we had to get our own coffee. So like the coffee, like what it does is by having to go get the coffee, it interrupts your flow. Like you need to just have a steady supply of coffee coming in. And so we were, it was fine. We paid for our coffee. We went and got it. It wasn't a big deal. But then we were kind of like, what's going on? Why are they withholding all the coffee? And it's like, you should win a latte in the game. You should win a lot. So that came out of, this sort of kind of side thing, like, we're fine, but actually it's kind of odd, that usually San Francisco too is just very spoiled with those kinds of things, right?
No, it makes a lot of sense that it would sort of work its way. The desire for coffee would work its way
But
into the.
but the underlying motivation overall was to have a component, interactive component to integrate rewards, right? Because playing games is all about being rewarded and scoring points. And what do you get for those points? So I think that's what I love about this whole process is that sometimes when you're in an accelerated development cycle, like a lot of these projects are made out of hackathons and things like that, um, it really opens the door to a lot of spontaneity and serendipity.
Um, let's listen to the last sound file that Siciliana sent us. Is this you?
This is me, yeah, in ASMR.
So tell us what's happening here.
So when you launch the game, there's the War of the Words preamble. So it really ties everything together in bringing
Mm-hmm.
H.G. Wells' words into what was happening
Mm-hmm.
um, at the start of his story, um, and then it lends a lot of theatricalness to it too. And I thought, okay, well, I want to incorporate ASMR. Let's whisper the opening passage of the story. It's something you can skip, obviously. If you've played the game before, you don't have to play it over and over. Um, but when we submitted it for critique, the Bose team actually wasn't didn't had not heard, I guess, of ASMR at that point. And the note, it was just funny to read the note that said, the opening is very creepy, very creepy. Please change that. So please.
So wait, why what made you think I want to incorporate ASMR into this game?
Okay. Well, ASMR is one of, I think, the earliest memes and trends on YouTube. It's been around for a really long time. When I had I was running a YouTube channel called Quirkly that had the main show was hashtag Berkeley, and we are looking at trends online around Berkeley. And I started seeing these ASMR videos. You go down these YouTube rabbit holes, and I started exploring ASMR. I think it was like in 2014. So I had done some unboxing Berkeley and unwrapping Kinder eggs in ASMR and things like that. And now it's just wild, like the things that people are like scratching on microphones and doing things like that. Um, but so again, it was sort of going back to my roots in like old school, like YouTube, which it's
Yeah.
funny now too, because this whole thing about like the golden age of YouTube, it's just,
What did it pass? Did we miss it?
oh, yeah.
It's behind us.
Well, I think now that there's TikTok, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
you're looking at like early, 2006. When did
Mm-hmm.
YouTube come out? 2004 or six, something like that.
Yeah, it did, and I think it was bought by
Google.
Google in 2008, maybe.
So
Um,
yeah,
yeah, that's fascinating. I wanted to ask. So I like that. I like that you were mentioning that ASMR is when you raise it. I think of it as sort of like one of these early new media uses and a thing that's like primarily sound based or digital
oh
sound
yeah,
based that is part of an ecosystem or part of a culture
the
that is
community.
a
Yeah.
community, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's deep into digital audio. um, so I wanted to ask about, you had mentioned this before when you're wearing the glasses and playing the game, that you're sort of bridging an imaginary or fictional narrative in your oral space, in your AURAL space, and your physical body is in your actual world. Can you talk about some of the considerations that you had to make as the creator for a user or a viewer, a listener who's having that real world
I think that's a
imagined space experience?
good question because um, you're talking about with this particular technology, and speaking with the future and stuff like that. Paula Abdul just announced some audio AR glasses at CES, so it's making a comeback. And when you're It's a very intimate experience because no one can really hear. Really, it's very hard to hear. So you could be in a meeting and listening to a podcast. No one would know because you can get prescription lenses for these too. So uh, you want to, in creating a shared experience around something that's a little bit more private and intimate, the laser dodge really served as a physical novelty like activity, like physicalness of comedy, because you'd be wearing these glasses if you're playing the game, you're out and about, and your virtual assistant, the latte goddess, is telling you, move left, move right, and you're jumping. So it creates a spectacle where people are wondering, what are they doing? What are they playing? They're asking those questions, they're getting curious, and maybe someone's even filming you, or maybe people are filming other people and their friends playing the game. So even with my game Icebreakers, which was a social networking game, or for dividing the ice walls between people at new events, you play Icebreakers. So this had an augmented ice wall, and you would tap your phone to shoot different cubes, and it would release icebreaker games. So when the wall came down, everyone wins. It's a collaborative game, but it was also another physical game. So two players are looking at their phones and tapping away, shooting at the ice cubes. No one can see what's happening, but they're all dodging back and forth, and it just like makes you turn your head, like, you know, what are they doing? And so it brings people into the experience, but out of curiosity. And I think that is, what you need in order to, push the envelope, or, move beyond your comfort zone, and really
Right.
come up with innovative approaches to telling these stories.
Yeah, it makes it like a physical experience and then a social experience for that reason.
And
Or
it's comedy. You're being silly, like you're not taking yourself so
yeah,
seriously, even though the tech is pretty sophisticated.
right.
So it's a definite strategy of what I call the high low, or it's not what I call it. It's a known design function of the high and the low. It's like diamonds and denim.
Right, 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 right.
So mixing something old with something new.
Yeah. Can you sort of think about you are you're a trailblazer in your media spaces. If you think about something like a podcast, like just a straight up Apple podcast, how do you think that experience is destined to change or evolve based on the technologies that you work in?
It seems like almost overnight we've really come into the augmented age, particularly with the launch of Chat GPT in December, which is a chatbot um, that can write scripts, that can generate copies. What was I going to say? I was going to say voice to text, but that's not it. Text to
It's
voice.
OpenAI. It's a natural language processing chatbot. So it does incredible stuff with language. Yeah.
And right. And so I think you could see yourself in a few years, being in the holodeck, in VR or on your couch, and you sit back and you say, I want to listen to a podcast that in a natural setting that's going to make me feel positive, or I want to listen to a horror um, podcast. So you can, and I want it read by, Stephen King, and you'll be able to pick, who you want your podcast to be narrated by, what elements you want in it, if and you can switch it up in the middle. So it's on demand. It's going to be everything on demand, I think, and custom curated to every single individual style the way you would, a game avatar, right? Right now, I think in October and November of last year, there's the podcast.ai, which did two podcasts, one with Joe Rogan and interviewing Steve Jobs, all generated by AI. So
Right.
you're not. I think it's unprecedented the amount of um, disruption that's going to occur around what we listen to, and how much of it is true, like the
Yeah.
deep fakes and all of that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. So it's going to be a little bit more complicated, um, but we'll still be listening through our ears.
Yeah. Well, one thing will remain the same.
Yeah, and sometimes the more things change, the more they stay the same. It could be that people eschew, they're like, no, we don't want all this augmentation. We want to get back to real people, real stories, because sometimes too, like, the truth is stranger than fiction in a lot of ways as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was also thinking that the podcast makers, the new makers, will be the people who curate or
Yes.
who request great experiences and then curate them and have a taste that other people like. I'm thinking of people with YouTube channels where they play games, right?
Oh yeah. Oh, yeah, and they love that. I mean, YouTube's amazing. Like, it'll be interesting to see how they evolve as well, because there's so many audio experiences on YouTube. They have the sound healing. I know, we fall asleep to the rain, even though it's been super rainy already. We don't need YouTube for that. But you listen to the sound waves or those healing frequencies and things like that. So YouTube is really, I think, a good way to um, test your content in a way that drives, SEO, for instance, like real practical stuff. So I think um, when we think about the future of podcasting, you want to think about the all of the sort of anchors and things that weigh us down about the present will be evident in the future as well. um, Interoperability, right? Um, how many more devices can we port our experiences to before we really start losing some of the gems, right? The formats change and you can't access these things anymore. So those are sort of the questions that I think about more so than the devices, because the devices, the sad thing is they really change so fast. And if a podcaster is in particularly interested in developing a podcast in this space, they have to be prepared for, one, porting to lots of multiple devices to find their core true audience. Um, but the beauty of podcasting in regard, as opposed to VR or augmented visual or audio, is that I can do so many different things listening to a podcast that I can't do if I'm just playing a game or focused on one thing in VR.
So it allows for multitasking.
Yeah, like, I feel like I have more time, right? I can listen to something and write. I can listen to something and look at videos at the same time too. Like, I can work and listen to a podcast. I can garden and listen to a podcast. And it's a particular kind of listener, right? That they're listening to long form shows. Um, they tend to skew a little bit more affluent and older, and there's only more listeners coming around, daily. So it's
Yeah.
definitely increasing. It's not going away.
Can you tell me a little bit more about YouTube for marketing and SEO? I guess part of this episode will be diving into um, using video for a podcast in the ways that so many podcasters already are, which is on YouTube. I have actually seen podcasts now on Instagram Reels. The podcasts are kind of like happening as like a TV show, and you're like, oh, this is a podcast. I'm supposed to then follow up and find. But can you tell me about um, how YouTube works, or what you meant in terms of
Well,
like YouTube's
I,
good for marketing?
well, I think it's a search engine. So people use YouTube a lot like search if they're trying to figure out how to do something, or um, I think when you type in your description words, I'm not an expert on YouTube for YouTube, but what drew me to put some of my early episodes on YouTube was really just one, getting the branding presence, right? I want to make sure that I have my podcast brand cornered. No one else can get that. So I think that's one. Two, I have read articles that it does help with your search engine optimization. And again, you just work it like a funnel. Your audience may not be on YouTube, but people can discover your podcast on YouTube and then go and listen to your podcast. And I think listeners expect that you are going to be on all the major platforms. So, for my Zero to Start, I didn't get a chance to post all the episodes up. I will eventually, but because fundamentally it was really about being on, iTunes, and that was the other thing. Just kind of getting away from YouTube a little bit, of just feeling like I can create brand presence on an Apple platform without having to make a game, right? Without having to sell an app. I can make an app eventually too, but I just felt like it gave me a broader reach. And um, I really got into podcasting when certain clients would start asking me if I was producing podcasts, and I was like, okay, well, I'm going to start,
I mean, that's how
making
I
my own.
found you, actually. I found you through Zero to Start.
I'm so glad. What did you
Yeah.
search when you, or were
Uh,
you looking for that, or you?
I was looking for um, podcasts in augmented reality, podcasts in VR. And then I found Zero to Start, which is a podcast about augmented reality and VR through Unity development. I listened to a few episodes and I thought, oh, this lady's doing cool stuff. And then I found out the other stuff that you were doing through your website. So yeah.
And it's been, we had a really great opportunity. We were Zero to Start was sponsored by Meta on a spotlight series featuring devs in the space, and then sort of making of their first game and how they got into VR. And that was, I think, in 2020, just heading into 2021. So it's been a long time. And, I have dreams of season two and Zero to Start again. But
I
the
will
name,
be, I'll be on it because I'm still in that Lego tutorial in Unity.
yeah, we'll keep going. It's really empowering when something starts to work that you didn't maybe, think that you knew how to do. And especially as you get older and you're more experienced in working with different things, I taught myself editing. So here I thought, I was like, oh, I can make a VR app in, a couple months, and you're like, do you know mobile app development? No, you don't. Do you know how to work a PC? Like my whole workflow had to change, and it was mayhem. It was horrific. And so that's sort of what inspired me to do Zero to Start, was that Oculus, or Meta now, has a program called Oculus Start. Um, a great program for indie devs where they get additional support from Oculus, and sort of guidance and just community around building their games. But when you submit to get into the program, you have to submit a build. You have to have something that actually works in the headset. So the concept of the show is initially around my friend Melanie Metzel wanted to make a sound healing app. And so instead of having a big class where we went week by week and maybe people would trail off because it's pretty complicated and very time intensive to make a VR or even just a demo, um, we could work together one on one and work her project from zero to get into the start, and then to a build where she would submit to get into the start program. And that would give her, once she's in the program, she would get a headset and the Savvy Oculus Start sweatshirt.
Cool.
So it was all kind of effort to get a sweatshirt swag.
But that's actually that's a cool goal to work towards. I mean, I was just sort of setting it as a process goal. Like, I'm going to spend 30 minutes a day on this and see if I can figure it out. But to have
Uh,
I'm going to do
You
a
have
build.
you have to, I think, with a game engine, if you don't have, it's hard enough if you have even media experience. But if you're really starting from sort of zero computer experience, you have to have at least a couple of hours, because it could take just an hour to figure out which version of Unity you're going to need for your particular project, and which, platform you're building for. There's so many decisions that have to be made, and you have no idea. It's almost better if you don't know what's coming, because, but all that just to say that you might want to give yourself a little bit more than 30 minutes at a time.
Yeah. I'll do some pushes on the weekend. We'll see.
Yeah,
Okay. So, yeah,
hardcore. Go
exactly.
hardcore.
Get all the way in. Don't just dip your toe in. Um, I asked you some of these. So let's talk a little bit about Zero to Start. Um, you have done podcasts. Like, I'm sure that producing Zero to Start or making Zero to Start was one of the easier things that you've done.
It's
um, is there
well,
anything?
no.
Tell me. No.
No, it was funny because Melanie and I were working out of she works at Berkeley Community Media, the local cable access station where I interned when I was in college. And so um, we thought, well, we make videos, we've made films, we can make a podcast, but setting up the audio and getting without interference and getting the right cables took a few tries. And I think one of our first episodes, we had a guest and the audio was just completely unusable, and it was very embarrassing. And, you kind of have to endure that a little bit. I think it's important to, yeah, as you get older, you think you kind of know how things work, and it's like there's so many
No,
new
I
things
know.
coming, and you make assumptions. So you can make an assumption that, oh, podcasting is really easy, but the fact is that, especially, like, I tend to be a bit of a perfectionist, and so I was definitely not going live. But the editing, on a hour long conversation, or even just 35, 40 minutes, um, was, you edit, then you listen to it, then you play it again, and is it really the right tone? And you want to do your guests, you always want to do your guests justice as well. So um, the amount of work that goes into a podcast is not a small thing. It's a job. It's
No,
definitely a job.
very true. I'm curious, when you said that you were putting these up on YouTube to sort of like maybe do greater catchment, find new potential users. What video did you put along with your audio, or did you record video as you were building the
I To simplify things, um, I recorded in Zencaster, and then would I made, and you can get these as templates, an audio wave, right? Like a voice audio wave. But I wanted to learn how to make one from scratch. So I went into After Effects and used some cool fun filters, made an audio file, and then put it into a circle. And I think I got that from a tutorial on YouTube, where you could take your audio file and then follow a shape. And so I just had the show logo with the channels that were on, the guest that was on, and then a live audio file, wave file that would move to the sound of the interviews. So you had some kind of motion, but
Yeah, some
it was
visual
kind of
interest.
tedious adding that last thing, and so I think that's what slowed me down from actually getting them on to
Right.
YouTube.
Right. Um we talked about podcasts evolving, and I love your vision of them sort of evolving into uh an on-demand in the holodeck, whatever you can imagine, you can hear. I'm curious, like, War of the Worlds aside, do you have an ideal example of what a VR or AR podcast might sound like? Or would there be a visual component? Like, do you have a thing that you dream of making that you haven't made, or a thing that you found that you love?
Well, I mean, at some point, I'd like to finish War of the Worlds. There's just so much potential there, and wouldn't it be fun to ride on a separate story? I think it would be fun to ride, a spice worm or a maker, right, or something in
Totally.
So, yeah, I mean, that's, you want to play make believe. So I was a product manager at Alcove, and it's a social VR app made by AARP where families can get together and explore VR safely. We had like like 1,500 virtual tours around the world. And as part of a caregiving pilot that I directed, we started adding caregiving podcasts to the living room TV that was in your virtual loft. And I was surprised. So, I mean, I'm just trying to, give you a sense of how simple it could be of just putting an audio podcast into a virtual home where people just relax on the porch of their virtual home. And they can, in Alcove, you have 3 environment settings. So you could be in the snowy mountains or in a butterfly meadow or overlooking an ocean. And then listening to a podcast that educates you about how to care for a loved one, how to change a wound dressing, or lots of educational podcasts around caregiving. And the pilot participants um, really liked it in terms of some did. I think you'll find like those niche audiences. So it depends on what your audience is looking for. Like if your audience is in VR and they also listen to podcasts, then I think, they might just want to sit. There's this sort of idea that you have to be doing all this stuff in VR, that you have to, build a world and you have to, climb a mountain and fly. And sometimes people just want to relax and see the ocean and, uh, try to experience, I think, what we call those liminal spaces, right? Where we're just not really trying to force ourselves to do anything other than just be where we are and with our favorite sorts of things like a game of checkers um, or just listening to a podcast. Now, what I could see though also is again like that hollow deck where you do a voice to 3D object environment shift, and you say, something that I haven't seen and I think is coming, and there have been examples of this are you're talking to your loved ones who have passed. Hearing my father passed away when I was 18. If I could go somewhere that looked a lot like our house and I could hear him say happy birthday, I mean, I think I would do that, or just even though I know it's not real, um, the the sense of audio again with that emotion, right? Like there's so many, like the way that some like a scent of cookies might remind you of your grandmother's kitchen. The voices take you back and they give you that sense of, of peace and confidence to face another day.
That's really beautiful. It reminds me of that scene in Contact, the movie Contact, where she goes
Right.
to that other planet and sees her dad. And
That's essentially it. That's the
yeah,
future of podcasting is aliens showing up as your dad in a
this is the
really like
culmination of War of the Worlds, by the way. um, well, thank you. I I want to ask one more quick other question, which is a
okay,
technical question. Do you work
okay.
in spatial audio by necessity when you're doing something like War of the Worlds? It has to be Dolby Atmos or
Interesting that you should
binaural or
ask.
spatial.
I have not had the opportunity to work with Dolby Atmos yet, but in particular, no, actually, we could just record with regular mics and the audio and do sound mixing, and then in Unity they have the positional audio speakers, so that's where you design your spatial audio was within Unity.
That's cool.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I didn't have to work with that, but those are like there's a lot of really cool ambisonic stuff going around. There's 360 audio mics, and there's lots of communities where you can explore that on Facebook or YouTube. But sometimes you don't actually need a lot of those things. Sometimes there's techniques and tools that are built into
Yeah.
the game engine itself that
So,
work for that
yeah.
particular thing. Kind of depends.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I feel that. Siciliana, thank you so much for jumping on with us.
Oh,
I
this
feel
was
like I
great.
learned so much and I feel inspired.
Good. Yeah, everyone should have it's like what, what was that movie with Christian Slater? Pump Up the Volume. talk hard or talk loud or something. Everyone has their own CB radio station or something. So
Yeah.
yeah, um, everyone go make a podcast.
It's true. And if you want to have your identity available or your voice available to be sort of like co opted by the AI in the future so your loved ones can hear you, you have to give it lots of material now. Thank you so much. I appreciate you jumping on. Thank you, everybody who listened at home. Um, that was very exciting. Thanks for enduring our live stream. And we will cut this into our episode 4 on video and the future of podcasts.
Excellent. It's very bright.